Good day. We are Juan Carlos, Andrea, Belen, Lucia, Maria Andrea, and Nicolle. And today we will be taking what we have seen in class to the next level, and we'll be talking about poverty more in depth and explaining the Sustainable Development Goal related to poverty. As we have seen in class, poverty cannot be defined in just one way. Poverty must be understood as a multidimensional issue that goes beyond simply being rich or poor. That is why we wanted to include this quote, to highlight that our perception of poverty is quite limited and that it is rooted in much more complex matters, not just monetary terms. As we try to define poverty, we must understand it can manifest itself in many ways. Poverty can be understood as hunger and malnutrition, limited access to education and other basic services such as sanitation, discrimination and exclusion, and the lack of participation and decision-making. The last two are related to social structures of our society, meaning that poverty goes beyond economics, making it clear that it has many fronts and perspectives. Now, how do we measure poverty? Since poverty is a multidimensional issue, it is measured through different approaches, which will be covered in depth in the next slide. However, these are the four main approaches that we will be talking about. These four main approaches try to capture the many faces poverty can have. Firstly, we have the monetary approach, which focuses on measuring poverty through income and consumption. Second, we have a capability approach, which refers to the deprivation of a person's capability to live the life they have reason to value. Thirdly, we have social exclusion approach, which captures how a person can be alienated or excluded from regular society activities. And lastly, we have the participatory approach, which highlights a person's lack of opportunity to participate in society. In the next slides, we will go over some indicators that will demonstrate how these approaches are captured.
As Nikki explained clearly well, poverty, it's a very complex issue, has many manifestations, and there's a lot of ways of measuring poverty or approach to how to understand poverty or to assess poverty, because it's not a black or white issue, it has many scales of grade. If we look at indicators that help us understand poverty or to identify poor countries, we can use the traditional ones such as GDP per capita or GDP growth. But we have taken the indicators or the indexes compiled by the United Nations least developed countries indicators that, if you remember, we studied them in the class where we had in groups and we needed to study one and explain it. Well, we have grabbed 5 indicators where we have picked 5 indicators where we believe that globes poverty better, and we have divided them in basic needs, in education terms, and in economic terms. In terms of basic needs, we chose the prevalence of undernourishment in total population. Well, this is basically an estimate of the proportion of the population whose habitual food consumption is insufficient to provide the dietary energy levels that are required to maintain a normal, active, and healthy life. This is one of the most important indicators to understand poverty, because this treats the food consumption or the dietary needs of the population. And food is the most basic need, and it's the thing that we have, that's the primordial thing that we need to have covered. And if we see a low percentage in this indicator, this can show us a country that is suffering from famine or that it's in risk of falling into poverty. In terms of education, we picked 2 that explains well the education situation in a country. That the first one would be the gross secondary enrollment ratio, that it's the numbers of students enrolled in secondary education regardless of age by the population of age group, which officially corresponds to the secondary education. This is basically the percentage of people that are studying secondary of the people that should be studying secondary. So we can see the people that are not studying or that are working and such on. The adult literacy rate is the percentage of population aged 15 years or over who can both read and write with understanding a simple short statement in her everyday life. These are two important indicators that complement each other and are important to understand the economic education situation in a country, because the first indicators, well, the adult literacy rate gives us the snapshot of people with limited skills, with minimal skills, that can perform simple tasks and can be effective at an economy. And the other indicator shows the people with sufficient or higher levels of skills that are required for the country to have economic development. We can see if we add up these two indicators and we see a country that has very low levels in both of them, we can determine that it has a complicated education system, and that it's poor development, and that it has limited access to basic and higher education that would impede its economic development. So we need to be very careful about that. In the economic terms, we have chosen the export instability in a country. This estimator is calculated using the export earnings trends and using its standard deviation as an instability measure. That is basically grabbing the export revenues of a country for each year, and calculating the difference between year to year, and that difference is the uncertainty level. The agricultural instability is measuring the fluctuations of agricultural production expressed in real terms. It's basically the same thing. So, such as in agriculture, you grab the year-to-year production, and the difference is the instability. Why are these indicators important to understand poverty? Well, because first of all, it shows the vulnerability of a country to certain things or to certain shocks. In that sense, people, governments, the private sector all make economic decisions for the future in terms of the prospective cash flows or the prospective revenues in the future. And that said, it's important for a country. If you don't know how much you're going to earn next year from your exports, you cannot make investment decisions, or you cannot plan well the budget, because you're not going to know how much money you're going to have to expend in your country. And in agriculture instability, it's important because agricultural production makes you make the economic decisions for the future. In the sense, are you going to have a surplus or a deficit in agricultural production? You're going to need exports, or you're going to export food. And if you don't plan well and you have a fall in agricultural production, and that can lead to famine and hunger, and it can worsen the economic conditions of your citizens, or including the social conditions of your citizens. So these are very important indicators to make economic decisions for the future, and it's better off if you don't have a lot of instability within these two indicators. These five indicators I've just explained give a certain complete snapshot, or gives you a very good toolbox to analyze the poverty levels of a country. If you add the five up and you compare them across countries, we can assess what are the most vulnerable countries, the countries at risk, or the poor countries in the world.
I will be now talking about the Sustainable Development Goals. As you already know, the number one Sustainable Development Goal of the United Nations is the N40 in all its forms everywhere. In 2019, there was the progress of this program was measured, and until now it has been a decline in global extreme poverty, but that declining has slowed down. This deceleration indicates that the world is not on track to achieve the target of less than 3% of the world living in extreme poverty by 2030. It is important to note that these people who live in extreme poverty they're a really vulnerable population, which are really prevents us to be affected by natural disasters and even more by climate change. So it is really important to take them into consideration when we're going um, to attack the problem of poverty. Also, when it comes to the government and what they should do to attack these extreme poverty situations, governments should invest in strong social protection systems and in key services to help those who are left behind. In this case, the people who live in really extreme poverty in around the world. So moving on to the next slide, we see the goals of the Sustainable Development Goals. The first one is to eradicate extreme poverty, as already mentioned. Secondly, to reduce the poverty by at least 50%. Third, to implement social protection systems, which are the ones I will prevent the vulnerable population, to be really, really affected by climate change or by natural disasters. Fourth, equal right to ownership, basic services, technology, economic resources. This is the basis to create a sustainable future for those communities. Fifth, build resilience to environmental, economic, and social disasters, which divides in two, which are mobilize resources to implement policy to end poverty, and to create, proport, and gender sensitive policy frameworks. These two are really important because as developing countries develop, they should develop in a different way that the developed countries had been doing so since history, and they need to do it in a sustainable way, which will not impact the environment. That is why these two policies are really important and should be taken into account when it comes to eradicate poverty and also extreme poverty.
So, after understanding the goals of the SDG, we turn over poverty and development and what has been done in order to achieve the objectives of no poverty. So, the SDG supports all activities and programs that are mainly related on three things: on creating job opportunities, supporting sustainable businesses, and promoting government policies that are directed to improve certain institutions. So, there are several different types of programs. And for example, in Bangladesh, there's a program led by the UNDP with the purpose of creating more jobs for women in extreme poverty. Also in Colombia, there's a program that helps people in Cauca to understand the process of raising crops in the healthiest way. This is to promote a good nutrition on the society, linking to the SDG goal of implementing social protection systems. Lastly, in Honduras, there's a program to promote tourism in poor zones with the objective of better distribution of the economy and also to encourage foreign and local people to visit places within the country. So, in conclusion, there are several programs around the world that contributes to the SDG 1 that we can all see them in their website.
To dig a little deeper into what countries are doing to fulfill the No Poverty Development Goal, we chose Nigeria as an example. According to the World Poverty Check, by June 2018, Nigeria had the largest extreme poverty population in the world, with over 85 million people living in extreme poverty, that is, with less than $1.90 a day. According to the World Bank, in order to end extreme poverty, Nigeria must invest in girls' education, invest in health and well-being, and expand economic opportunities and embrace technology. So far, the government has developed several programs. The first one is ongoing school feeding, that is, programs to provide educational and health benefits to the most vulnerable children. With this, they increase enrollment rates, reduce absenteeism, and improves food security at the household level. We can see that this goes along with what the World Bank said by investing in education and health. The second one is economic empowerment, and the government is doing this through job creation and free loans for traders and artisans. Once again, they are expanding economic opportunities as the World Bank suggested. This is a good start for the country since they are tackling the most important issues. However, it is not possible to measure yet if this will be enough to fulfill the goal by 2030.
Thank you, Mandy. We are seeing that eradicating poverty in all its forms remains one of the main challenges facing humanity. As we can see in this graph by the World Bank and Poverty and Equity Data Portal, we see the number of people living in extreme poverty has decreased by more than half between 1990 and 2015, and it forecasts this trend will continue to be downwards. Also, we know that this type of poverty is mostly concentrated in sub-Saharan Africa. It's true that accelerated economic growth in countries like China and India has lifted millions of people out of poverty, but progress has been uneven. Still, many lack access to food, clean water, and adequate sanitation. Moreover, the likelihood of women living in poverty is disproportionately high relative to men, due to unequal access to paid work, education, and property. So, a question that we made to ourselves was, is this trend a true snapshot? Is this trend what we are living now in reality? No. While extreme poverty is going down around the world, it is increasing in countries affected by fragility, conflict, and violence. We call these the FCV countries. According to the World Bank, poverty is changing, as 2/3 of people living in poverty will live in these areas in 2020, and it is estimated that by 2030 this number will increase and world's extreme poor will live in these situations. The impacts on people and economies are stark. Violent conflict has spiked dramatically since 2010. Conflicts now drive 80% of all humanitarian needs and reduce global gross domestic product growth by 2 percentage points per year on average. And this obviously has consequences, as FCV challenges do not respect country borders and often spiral into multidimensional, regional, and global crises. We can think on some consequences or some spillover effects which reinforces poverty in these FCV countries. These are social and economic exclusion, climate change, gender and other inequalities, demographic challenges, and illicit financial flows and other global trends that contributes to this complexity. Such long displacements can have a devastating toll on generations of refugees and deeply impact host communities. Well, actually, this is what we are seeing right now in Europe, right? But what is going to happen in the future? Okay, some good news, because we can still do something. What we can do? We have thought about several things the public sector can do and also what the private sector can do. The public sector. As we know, the World Bank was founded after World War II to support post-conflict reconstruction in Europe. It has since evolved to address challenges before, during, and after crisis. The 2020 World Bank Group strategy emphasizes on post-conflict reconstruction and supporting refugees and host communities. Moreover, what governments and international organizations can do are address root causes like climate change, government transparency and accountability, justice, and the rule of law. Preserve key institutions and access to basic services like health and education for the most marginalized. Support countries in the transition out of conflict and enable to growth of the local private sector, particularly small and medium enterprises which provide 80% of jobs in fragile settings. On the other hand, the private sector could also make some effort, as just only 1% of global foreign direct investment goes to fragile and conflict situations countries. We know, as economists, that FDI into countries with low capital and high marginal product of capital give higher return to investors. This can stimulate a vibrant and inclusive local private sector which ignites economic growth, provides jobs and services, and stabilizes societies. Fragile and conflict-affected economies need investments that will create jobs, spur economic growth, generate tax revenues, rebuild infrastructure, and create hope for the people. While every fragile situation has a unique and complex set of issues and the risks are high, there are ways for the private sector to help boost economic growth and support livelihoods. Thank you very much for your time, and here you have some conclusions. If you have some questions, please don't hesitate in contacting us. Thank you.